Hi, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I'll help you create teams worth leading, because life's too short to lead mediocre teams. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, advisor and coach to tech execs, and today our subject is fear. I'm hoping you're not too scared. Fear is something that I'm afraid actually harms so many leaders all around, and there are two types of effects that I see that fear has on leaders. The first one, and that's usually the most obvious one, is we are fearful, we are afraid of something happening, and therefore we avoid taking any action in a general direction, handling something. The opposite is when we rush into decisions, we rush to do something because we're afraid of what might happen if we delay too long, of what's currently happening, and that's scaring us, and we're doing things fast. No matter what direction your fear takes you, fear-driven leadership is not really leadership. When we're acting just based on our fear, we usually miss a lot of opportunities to do the right thing in the long term. We avoid an opportunity to treat the root cause of different issues within our teams, and we usually end up creating teams that are more brittle, that we might have another month of quiet in air quotes, but it's only quiet that's going to last a little while longer, oftentimes at the cost of the root causes getting worse. Whatever issue we haven't dealt with is not solved, but will actually just be delayed and keep growing while we avoid handling it. Unfortunately, this is something that happens almost all the time. And my question to you, dear listener, is whether you're letting fear guide your decisions. For example, I've seen over the last 6 months several times CEOs who knew clearly that their VP of engineering, their CTO, head of engineering, was the wrong person for that position right now, and yet they took no action over the course of months because they were afraid. They were afraid of what might happen because they really liked that person, because many people in the team appreciated that leader, or because they would need to find a new person to lead the team. Whatever the reason was, whatever the thing that scared them, they delayed longer and longer and longer at the cost of losing months of what could have been a much better organization, delivering much better results had it been led by someone that was the right person for the job. This is something that I see all the time. Similarly, with companies that, for example, have realized that they have to have layoffs, or they have to pivot because something in the business is not working correctly, and yet because they were afraid of facing the truth, facing reality, and making those tough decisions, they were afraid of the day after having told that to people and how people would look at them, how they would be seen, whatever. They kept delaying it until eventually the problems got worse. They had to have bigger layoffs. They had to pivot way harder, or maybe didn't make it out of that needed pivot. And I see this repeatedly. And the other way around, which again is not as frequent, but still something that you need to be aware of, because maybe this is how you operate. Maybe that's how fear controls you. We act too fast just because we're afraid. Someone tells you that they're not happy with their current role. Maybe they're thinking about leaving. Maybe they told you they got an offer, whatever, and you immediately rush to action and like, yeah, sure, we're going to match it, or sure, you're going to get promoted. When we act immediately without taking a second to think, to consider what is the right thing to do, how we want to move forward, what's the right path here for a team, and not just to fix this current issue that has popped on my screen. When we rush to action without thinking, usually what we end up doing is we let fear control us. We just want to make sure that that problem is gone real quick without realizing what actually is happening, what actually are my possibilities. And the way to solve both and address it is address the actual fear. And that's the sort of exercises I do with my clients when I notice that they're being led by fear. And I ask a few very simple things that I want you to keep in mind if you're noticing that fear is controlling you. First of all, let's really lay out what's the scenario you're afraid of. What do you think in your mind can happen? And at this stage, I recommend letting it go out as stupid as it might really be. Like, realistically, when you rationalize it, that probably not everyone's going to quit if you fire your VP of engineering. But if that's like your fear, that a lot of people would, write it down or say it to someone. Find a peer, find a coach, whatever. So you actually voice your concerns. Because when we do that, a lot of times it actually helps us realize how irrational we might be. Now, once you actually voiced or wrote down the craziest scenario, let's move to what is a reasonable risk, what actually might happen that doesn't require a 1 in 1,000 chance of it happening. And still, that doesn't mean that whatever you're talking about here is guaranteed to happen, but we're talking about what is, reasonable, likely, like 10% of a shot. That's still a risk that we need to manage. Think about those and think about what you would do. What would it actually mean? We're thinking about the contingencies. If this actually were to happen, what could you do to fix it, to get things back to how they need to be? And if you have any plans in your mind, that's really a lot easier because you're thinking, okay, it's like for me, my thinking is if I'm out in a city, I don't know, I just might run out of phone battery and then I won't have an easy way to find my path home or even pay if that's like I'm always with my Apple Pay. What would I do? Okay, contingent action, I'm going to have a spare battery with me so I can charge it if needed. And thinking about contingent action is one. Step two is let's think about preventive measures. What can you do right now as you're tackling the fear, as you're talking about the action you should or should not make? What can you do to prevent the risk from actually taking place? Because sometimes that's even easier, not talking about how to fix things once an issue has risen, but maybe we can avoid it altogether. So tackle your fear and think, maybe as we're doing this, I can already start grooming the replacements for the VP of engineering because we already have quite a good bench here. I can start talking to people and see, so I can get a sense of how difficult or dangerous the actual change might be. For example, and for me, again, if I'm using the same a bit contrived example of traveling somewhere, I might say, okay, I have the spare battery, but you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna put my phone on low power mode and I'm gonna avoid scrolling just through feeds as I'm waiting in line to get some gelato so I don't run out of battery fast anyway. You think about the preventive measures, you think about the contingent actions, and that can really help you stop being managed and led by your fear. Because, the only thing about fear that's good is Fear of the Dark, a very nice song by Iron Maiden, but essentially anything else, I don't want to have fear around, okay? And I don't think you can be a good leader if you allow yourself to be led by fear, either taking action too quickly without thinking about it, or being stuck in paralysis and not making any action because you're afraid of what might happen. Take this short and simple list of steps that you can take to help you address what's happening. And if you still find yourself stuck, it is incredibly useful to go through the same exercise, not by yourself and not with an LLM, which I don't care what you're thinking, it's still not a human, and getting someone else. Find a peer, find a friend, a colleague, or get a coach if you need a coach. My email's in the show notes, and you'll make progress much faster. Okay? That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. As always, do check out my newsletter. It's the best newsletter online for tech execs with a lot of free content in different forms. The link is in the show notes. If you have any questions or comments, my email is in the show notes. And do check out Unplug with Aviv. The next session will take place in the next couple of weeks or so don't miss out. Ciao.